media, online viewers, radio listeners via St. Martin Gov Radio 107.9 FM and other radio stations. I am Charity Dunker, and welcome to the Live Council of Ministers press briefing for today, Wednesday, March 20th, 2019. At this time, I'd like to invite the Prime Minister and the Minister of General Affairs, the Honorable Leona Romeo Marlin, to address you.
Good morning to all. My colleague ministers, members of the press, good morning, St. Martin. As stated in the media this week, the government of St. Martin is in its final stages of amending the national ordinance on ID cards to include diplomatic IDs. The IDs will be granted to privileged persons. Privileged persons are defined as those carrying out diplomatic consular services on our island on behalf of a specific state. This diplomatic ID will allow for national authorities to easily identify these persons and use the necessary discretion when interacting with them. In anticipation of the distribution of these cards, the Department of Foreign Affairs or Foreign Relations will commence today with familiarization workshops developed to train and bring law enforcement personnel of the Ministry of Justice up to speed with the rules and procedures associated with the new IDs. My second announcement, I would also like to announce that I have been invited and will be traveling to Aruba next week to attend the International Conference on Small Island States and Subnational Island Jurisdictions, which will be organized around the theme Island States, Island Territories, sharing stories of island life, governance, and global engagement. I will be addressing the conference on the experience of St. Martin on its resilience and rebuilding efforts, especially as an overseas countries and territories. Lessons learned. The University of Aruba, in association with the Aruba Center of Excellence for the Sustainable Development of Small Island Development States, will host the conference, which will take place at the University of Aruba in Oranjestad, Aruba, on March 26th to the 29th. I thank you and I await your questions.
Thank you very much, PM. I now invite the Minister of Public Health, Social Development and Labor, the Honorable Emily, to address you.
Good morning, colleague ministers. Good morning, members of the media, those listening by radio, television, and internet. I have three brief topics to update the community about. Number one, the Ministry of VSA, and more specifically the Department of Social Affairs, Social Services and Community Development and Family and Humanitarian Affairs, has been very active handing out boxes of emergency food kits to various foundations and churches. So these are food kits that were received as a donation to the government of St. Martin. These were donated by Global Medic. Global Medic is a registered Canadian charity whose mandate is to save lives and provide short-term rapid response in the wake of disasters and crisis, both at home in Canada and abroad. So they were very active after the passing of Irma. They had donated, in particular, water filtration kits. So these were kits that would be used at the time because the water quality was sometimes questionable. So these were filtration kits to make sure that if you had water that you weren't sure about, you could filter it through to make it drinkable. So they donated 150 of these kits at the time. These were all distributed. In addition, they donated to the ministry 20,556 emergency food kits. And these were donated to make sure that we were ready, prepared for hurricane season 2018. Luckily, the island was spared. So we had all of this stock of food in their possession as a ministry. And in order to ensure that these donations don't go unused, these kits are now in the process of being distributed to the community. Each of these kits includes 6 meals, including long grain rice, hydrated soy flour, dehydrated vegetables, and vitamin fortified powder. It adds up to 123,336 meals that are being donated to the community via these different churches and foundations. And so we'd like to thank the partners that are coming in, that are taking the goods, and they are helping and preparing it and using it for distribution to the community. So again, it's good, and thank you to Global Medic in the first place for making this available to us. The second topic I'd like to touch on briefly is, you may have noticed in the newspaper this week, there was a signing of a service level agreement between NEPA and the Kids at Sea Foundation. And I think it's good to highlight really the steps that government's making in terms of how do we match the local skills, local talents that we have available, that interest, and how do we make sure that they meet the demands of the community and find good jobs in the marketplace. So NEPA is working together with Kids at Sea Foundation. And so for those of you who aren't very familiar with the marine sector, in the marine sector, it's critical that you have various certifications. If you want to work on one of the mega yachts or you want to work in the marine sector, you need to have certifications. Otherwise, even though you may have skill sets, they will not hire you in the marine industry. So that certification process is very important. And so what this service level agreement does is it allows the standards of the marine sector to be incorporated into the training process. And they need to comply with IMO, which stands for International Marine Organization Standards. So actually the IMO is a UN specialized agency with the responsibility for safety and security of shipping and prevention of marine and atmospheric pollution by ships. So these are very specific international standards. So again, if you want to participate in the marine sector industry, then you need to have this certification. So as we look at the course, it was great to see that there was a number of attendees there who are planning on participating. And I think it was an opportunity to highlight to them as well that, you know, in my previous role as SHTA, we saw in our tourism master plan that one of the sectors identified as being ideal for future economic growth exactly is the marine sector. Number one, when you look at what the impact is to the island as an industry, they have less impact. In other words, if you looked at industry, they would maybe be pollution issues. Other land-based tourism adds more vehicles, more traffic. So the feeling was that the marine sector brings a lot of economic value with relatively little burden on our infrastructure. And so from that perspective, it was identified as a key industry to develop. But the other thing is the marine sector is a very lucrative sector. If you look at the yachts, when they come in, they spend money in our supermarkets, in our hardware stores, they buy flowers, they spend a lot of money when they come to the island. And actually the crew as well invest and spend a lot of money in entertainment on the island. So it really was identified as, number one, St. Martin having that strategic position, but also number two, that this was really an ideal industry for growth. And I think I'd like to commend both NEPA and Kids at Sea Foundation for helping to bring the educational resources together to give our people the opportunity to participate in that sector. And as a matter of fact, one of the other points that they made is that once you have these qualifications, it also opens you up to work internationally. You know, once you have these, you can certainly travel and go abroad and work in the sector in not just St. Martin. So it gives you a skill set that's well marketable across the world. The last topic I'd like to touch on is our construction sector meet and greet. This happened last evening, actually. The event was well attended. It was hosted here in the government building. You had a number of speakers, myself as speaker. We also had a Mr. Andrew Boudica from the Inspectorate, and we also had Mr. Claret Connor from the National Recovery Bureau. And there were a number of objectives from the meeting trying to ascertain what exactly is happening with the reconstruction process on the island and what the feedback from the sector is in terms of what are some of the bottlenecks, what are some of the handicaps going forward. And there were a number of points that came out of the meeting I would like to just update the public about. Number one, we found it was very engaging. Happy to hear that the participants engaged, asked questions, so there was a good dialogue back and forth. Very happy the NEPA and MIC-IT representatives were there last night as well. And it turns out that most of the graduates, over 90% of the graduates from the course that had their graduation just a few weeks ago, have already been absorbed into the working force. So I think that's a very good story. It means that, again, if you look at the story, it means that we've taken people who were either unemployed or underemployed as part of the Ministry of VSR's skill training program that's funded by the World Bank. We've allowed people to participate in an educational course that they would have normally had to pay for themselves and find the time to attend themselves. So we've made the resources available for them to be paid to attend the courses, so allows them to maintain, hopefully keep their head above water, and also have health insurance as they participate in these training courses. So the great thing is we've given them help to stay afloat, they've gotten skills to make themselves more marketable, and they've already been absorbed into the workforce. So I think it's a great story. And we're happy that the second course is already actually fully subscribed, and they're continuing, and I think the anticipated graduation for that class is in August of this year. So again, I think the ministry, together with our partners, are doing really great things. There was quite a mixed reaction to future prognosis for work. Some of the companies explained that they had contracts, but as these contracts were finishing, being completed, they didn't see new jobs coming on the horizon. There was some concern about some of the projected larger projects still not being started as yet, so there's some concern from some sectors. And others feel that on the smaller scale that there's still some level of work, but they are also seeing a slowdown from that side. To our Minister of Romy, one of the points that came across rather firmly from the group was that the process of issuing building permits is delaying the reconstruction process. They feel that there's people who have money, who want to redevelop, but they're waiting for building permits. So I think that's something that as government we need to jointly look at. How do we stimulate our economy and make sure our reconstruction process is moving? The other issue is funding. A lot of people find that their insurance money that they receive, that they've spent, has been exhausted, or their personal savings, and so there's really a capital issue. There's an issue in terms of people finding the financial resources to continue with the reconstruction of their projects. So a couple of issues in terms of how can we speed up the reconstruction project. There was discussions about the availability of local labor, about productivity and the skill sets that the companies are looking for. So again, it was good that the MIC-IT and NEPA were there to look and see what skills we need to ensure that our workforce have in order to be properly placed in the marketplace. And one feedback point as well, some of the companies indicated that there's again this perception that applying for work permits is too cumbersome and too difficult. But actually, I think perhaps the ministry, we could do more in terms of better identifying what the requirements are when they need to apply for the work permits in terms of what documentation is required. But again, the documentation is, the requirements are set out in legislation. So again, as ministry, we're obligated to follow the law. But once the permits are submitted and complete, right now the ministry is approving permits between 2 to 4 weeks from the time that they're submitted. So I don't see that the government is holding up anything from a work permitting process, right? So again, we encourage, and again, we are seeing it that the companies that are applying for work permits, most of them are issued. So unless there's really some big issues in terms of the applications, we recognize the need for the reconstruction. So most of the permits that once they're properly submitted are being approved for the construction sector. So this perception from the industry that getting work permits is difficult, I don't believe is accurate, and I certainly would encourage companies to come in. If they're not sure how to do it, come in and speak to one of the workers here at the ministry. As minister, I certainly stressed that the point that rebuilding physical structures without local involvement, in other words, without local labor involved, without local companies involved, isn't what I would consider to be a true recovery. Our recovery process needs to be inclusive to rebuild our economy as well as our physical structures in our community. All of the participants there echoed the desire to the National Recovery Project Bureau that the projects need to be accessible. Some of them complained about the fact that when they looked at the tender documents, they'd get an 80-page book and say, look, wow, this felt sort of daunting to them in terms of how they could participate. And I was very happy. The presentation from Mr. Claret Connor indicated that one of the things they're looking at doing is offering training courses so that they can help the people who are interested in participating in projects, reconstruction projects funded through the World Bank Fund, what they can do in terms of understanding the process better so that they can be involved in our reconstruction industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Lee, for your opening remarks. At this time, I invite the Minister of Tourism, Economic Affairs, Transport, and Telecommunication, Minister Johnson, to address you. Minister?
Members of the media, my colleagues in the Council of Ministers, and to those listening via radio, television, or the internet, a pleasant good morning to you. I would like to convey my sincere condolences to the children, siblings, family members, friends, and loved ones of Mr. Marius Richardson as you mourn his loss at this time. Much strength, and my prayers go out to you at this time of bereavement. Additionally, I would like to extend birthday greetings to Relika Gums-Roach, who is, of course, from the Department of Communications, well known to us here for hosting this press briefing as well, and of course, my fellow Rotarian sister. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. This is an infamous saying that comes from a Chinese proverb. Last week, I asked each and everyone listening to this media broadcast, or by written media, where do I stand? Today, I implore you to take a look back at history on the life-changing battles won by taking that first single step. We all can recall the infamous quote by Rosa Parks. People always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired, but that isn't true. I was not tired physically. No, the only tired I was tired of giving in. Rosa Parks in the United States stood up against inequality and racism by refusing to give up her seat on a Montgomery, Alabama city bus in 1955. The United States Congress called her the First Lady of Civil Rights and the Mother of Freedom of the Freedom Movement. Nelson Mandela, for standing up for the freedoms today many in South Africa can enjoy. The South African activist and former President Nelson Mandela helped to bring an end to apartheid and had been a global advocate for human rights. Former US President Barack Obama that ran for and entered the White House with the promise of becoming a transformational leader, the nation's first black president, and a unifying figure who in many ways cleansed America of its racial, cultural, ideological, and partisan divides. It would be remiss of me not to continue to pray for the Honorable Member of Parliament, Theo Heiliger, his wife, Grisha, his family and friends. May you continue to find solace knowing that after every stormy day, the sun shall shine bright again, especially over the greatest country in the world, our sweet St. Martin land. May you continue to know that you all shall remain in my thoughts and prayers during this difficult time. This week, as Acting Minister of Education, Youth Culture and Sports, I approved the Dutch diagnostic test for the Group 8 students as a foreign language in all foundation-based education schools. The test will run from the 27th of May and including the 29th of May. A Dutch diagnostic test will be carried out by TAL Uni to all Group 8 students in the foundation-based education primary schools. It is mandatory for all Group 8 students to participate in this assessment. The test is an assessment tool to determine students' skill level of the Dutch language in the areas of listening, reading, writing, and speaking. The ministry approved for the assessment to be done across all foundation-based schools because the need has been signaled for the improvement in student performance in the Dutch language. The assessment will not be used as a tool to determine which type of secondary school suits the need for every individual student, as it's done with the results from the foundation-based exit exam. The Division of Exams and the Division of Educational Innovations are charged with facilitating the Dutch diagnostic test across all foundation-based schools. Additionally, I approve the continuation of two Memorandum of Understandings between St. Martin and two universities. The first, of course, being St. Martin and the Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University. The general purpose of the MOU, but not limited to, is to continue educational and academic exchanges and other scholarly pursuits. It is expected that collaborative relationships thereby established will strengthen educational and academic ties between the two participants while providing the highest quality of education and supporting the partnership agreement between the government of St. Martin and the city of Tallahassee. Since the execution of this partnership agreement, students from St. Martin have enrolled at Florida State University, FSU, Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, FAMU, Tallahassee Community College, and Lively Technical Center. The St. Martin government has provided tuition funding for their students to attend these educational institutions. These educational institutions have also executed agreements via and with the St. Martin government to facilitate this student exchange effort. To continue the education exchange program with FAMU, the government of St. Martin wishes to partner with FAMU to provide a scholarship program for St. Martin study financing recipients who participate in the student exchange program. The other, of course, Memorandum of Understanding signed was the St. Martin and the Tallahassee Community College. The purpose of the MOU and scholarship agreement was to continue to strengthen the educational, academic exchanges, and other scholarly pursuits between St. Martin and the Tallahassee Community College, while providing the highest quality of education and supporting the sister city partnership agreement between the public entity of St. Martin and the city of Tallahassee. As a reminder, all efforts are in place under the Ministry of TIAT for the Gaming Control Board Forum. The 4th Annual Dutch Caribbean AML and Gaming Regulation Forum, of course, is set for the 4th of June to the 7th of June at the Sonesta Maho Beach Resort and Casino. This week, I would like to once again remind everyone for the registration process, including a special code that is to be used, and none other than the code of TEAT, T-E-A-T-T, would be the code that should be used when making a reservation, which will save you a discount of $300 US. Of course, you can register for this event by simply going on the link www.govrisk.org/DCGRF 2019, and then click on registrations and reserve your place at the early bird rate of $1,250 US. Of course, we look forward to all stakeholders participating in this event from across the different sectors, and the Ministry of TIAT will continue to make sure that this forum is indeed fully organized and arranged. At this time, I thank you and look forward to any questions from the media.
Thank you, Minister Johnson, for your opening remarks. I now invite the Minister of Justice, the Honorable Cornelius de Weaver, to address you. Minister?
Thank you, Ms. Dunker. Good morning, Madam Prime Minister, colleague ministers, media. Good morning, St. Martin. In the last few weeks, there has been many discussions surrounding MP Helliger. Please know that it is not customary for the ministry or I to respond to any investigations, whether they are open or closed. As much as I sympathize with his family and any family whose loved ones, parent, child, or friend are involved in an investigation that has led to his or her pretrial detention or incarceration, there is a fine line that any minister of justice has to walk to avoid getting personally involved. The minister is responsible for public order and should not get involved in individual cases. This case, like every case, has to be fought in the court of justice and not in the court of public opinion. With this in mind, I would like to stress that the office of the Minister of Justice cannot and should not be compromised or used as the fall guy, neither for the prosecutor nor any suspect. The system that we have, trias politica, with our legislative, executive, and judicial branches, clearly separate the powers. These are the boundaries in which we must operate. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Justice Cornelius de Weaver. I now invite the Minister of Public Housing, Spatial Planning, Environment and Infrastructure, Minister Michaelos Gitteson, to address you. Minister?
Thank you, Ms. Dunker. Good morning, Prime Minister, fellow ministers, press, and audience members viewing and listening. Today, I have only two short points to update you on in this press briefing session. The distribution of the materials through the Ministry of Romi and VSA is nearing completion, whereas 23 residents who applied for assistance has been assisted thus far. The residents provided the labor, and government assisted with the building materials that were donated by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The building materials were provided to the residents in phases who were responsible for the labor works, and this project has proven to be successful with good cooperation between government and the various beneficiaries. The project is expected to be closed off within the coming weeks. Next, the upgrading of the Dutch Quarter sewerage, the 10th EDF sewerage project, is presently undergoing with the implementation of sewage lines, paved roads, street lights, and sidewalks. There has been some challenges with the private land ownerships, but the Ministry of Romi is busy looking into resolving these matters. The project is expected to be completed nearing the end of this year, and as a general contractor, Van Boekel is pushing very hard to make sure that the inconveniences to the residents is minimized as much as possible as the project progresses. As Minister of Romi, I would like to thank the residents and visitors that are making use of this road for their cooperation and understanding with the inconvenience that comes along with the execution of this project. In the end, it will all be worthwhile, and it's in the better interest for the community and the residents and visitors of Dutch Quarter. Thank you. This concludes my press briefing for today.
Thank you, Minister Gitteson, for your opening remarks. The Minister of Finance, the Honorable Perry Heerlings, is present, however, will not be making any opening statements, but will be available for any questions the members of the media may have. We now move on to the question and answer session. Stephen Cerillion from PJD2, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Ministers, good morning. My question is for the Justice Minister. One would say since the arrest of MP Theo Halliger, you finally came out and made a statement. Why your statement only now?
Thank you, Mr. Cervellis. Please note again, it is not customary. There have been others who have been arrested as well, and the office has not made any statements. Last year, there was another MP that was also arrested. Again, no statements was made because you cannot cross those lines.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Andrew Bishop from St. Martin News Online, you now have the floor.
Thank you very much. Minister Gitteson, could you tell me at this time if there's anything being done about the exorbitant prices for rent that people have to pay since the hurricanes?
Sorry, Mr. Bishop, I did not understand your question. Can you repeat it for me, please?
Since the passage of the hurricanes of 2017, the rents in the different locations have raised by over 100%. Is there anything that could be done about that?
I'm afraid that question might be directed to the Prime Minister.
Prime Minister, could you please?
Thank you for that question. Indeed, the Rent Committee has brought these issues to my person, and the ordinance that regulates the Rent Committee is being looked into, and I know that we've had some serious complaints about such, so it's being researched right now.
Thank you, Prime.
Thank you. PM. Mr. Lyndon Brown from BCN TV, you now have the floor.
Good morning to the people of St. Martin. Congratulations, I know you're listening. And good morning to the ministers. Question to Minister De Wever. There's a lot of Dutch enforcement officer here in St. Martin. As a justice minister, if there are any inconsistency, meaning mistreatment of any national of St. Martin, where do the justice minister of St. Martin comes in?
If there's any with the Dutch police officers on the island, if there's any mistreatment, of course it goes through the regular channels of the chief of police, who has to, of course, have his team act on internal investigation. And if it's escalated to me, then depending on the circumstances, I would have to pass it on to the prosecutor, but I am not directly involved in those situations.
Thank you, Minister. Siren Cerulean from PJD2, you have the floor.
The Minister of Remy. For some time now, we have not noticed road markings. What has been done to address that issue? And the traffic light has not been functioning for a long time now. Anything been done to ensure that it's back to working orders?
Yes. Thank you for the question, Mr. Cerulean. The ministry is right now preparing both advices for the road markings and stoplights. I could tell you that the issue with the stoplights is that before the hurricane, there were stoplights installed, but they were not according to the standards for the Dutch laws that we carry here on St. Martin. So we had to make sure that we have the proper lighting now installed. So that's why it's been taking such a long time. And with the road markings, we're trying to make sure that all the roads are properly patched before we put any markings on the streets. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Andrew Bishop from St. Martin News Online, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dunker. Minister of Justice, we've had an ongoing problem where we've seen that the police have to take their vehicles if they're damaged to private mechanics. Is there any thought given to having your own mechanical institution for the police or the Justice Department?
That has not been brought to my attention or even reflected in the budget. However, the new cars that we have service agreements that are attached to it, and that's what we're going to be using for any services or repairs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Lyndon Brown from BCN TV, you have the floor.
Question to Minister Johnson. Soon we're going to have some celebrity cricketers coming to our show. There are some crisis in hotel rooms, and residents are planned to house visitors. Do your ministry thinking about having housing? Apparently, you may have a brief estimate of the visitors coming to St. Martin for that T1, the cricket tournament coming next week.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Of course, for the Ministry of TIAT, we are always excited to see things that will stimulate our economy. Room inventory is of paramount importance. It's closely being monitored by the ministry itself. Of course, resorts such as Sonesta Maho coming on board is an added plus right now at this time. Even for the upcoming carnival season, room inventory has been a question in terms of where we're going to accommodate certain persons. That's why early bookings have already started for many of the conferences that are yet to come, such as PAMAC, the Gaming Control Board, as well as the conference that we're having for aviation. So those are things that are going to be an ongoing process. Reason why, as a nation, we still have to continue to be cognizant of the fact that this is part of the rebuilding process. And St. Martin, of course, has an added value by having Airbnb, which is other accommodations. There's about 300 properties that when you go on the website, you see listed. So the Tourist Bureau is busy finalizing that list, that we have that list finalized. Of course, it's at the Ministry of Finance for the finalization of that MOU. So hopefully within short, with support of the Ministry of TIAT, we can have that ratified to further bolster the number of hotel room inventories that we have. But besides that, of course, St. Martin's room inventory is also dependent on villas as well as other turnkey rentals that are available. So room inventory is going to be a discussion point, but the Ministry of TIAT is closely monitoring it, and we applaud all efforts and support all efforts to have hotel rooms open, new properties opened, and new resorts reopened at this time in our country's reconstruction phase.
Thank you, Minister. We now move on to our third and final round of questions. Stephen Sterilian from PJD2, you have the floor.
Minister of Health, Emily. Quite amazingly, you never spoke or mentioned the National Health Insurance. As you said previously, you would have used that platform to provide as much information as possible. During the recent visit of the representatives from PAHO, they clearly stated that there is a need to properly inform the general public as you move forward. What do you intend to do in that the community of St. Martin is well informed?
Stephen, thank you for your question. And you're right, actually. One of the things that we said we would do is we would try and start with sensitizing the public more in terms of what the general health insurance legislation entails. Based on some of the feedback, some of the initial questions that we've gotten from the community, we're sort of rethinking about what points we need to communicate with the public. As a matter of fact, I think it was this week or last week that PM, you did a presentation to Council of Ministers where they used sort of an animated video graphic. And actually, the Minister of Finance, I saw, also came with an animated video graphic. And I think that given the complexity of the general health insurance, we're actually looking at contracting a company to help us with a PR campaign with those types of animated video graphics to really help the public to understand better what the issues are surrounding the general health insurance, why we need it. The other thing what I found is that in general, we've been focused very heavily on what the general health insurance legislation is, what we're doing, but actually what we find is we need to do a better job explaining what our current situation is and what the really driving factors are why we need it. And so we're retooling a little bit, putting more information together so that we can communicate those points better to the public. But absolutely, the idea of communicating to the public is key to the ministry's focus. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Andrew Bishop from St. Martin News Online, you have the floor.
Thank you. Minister Lee, is there any structural solutions to the financial dilemma of the healthcare sector, such as SZV, since the government continues to owe the healthcare providers for 7 months before they are paid?
Actually, your question dovetails exactly into what I just spoke about, that the reason that we're working on the general health insurance is that it is a structural solution to the financial problems that we have. And that's why I think many people don't understand the root causes. To give you an example, for example, the 60-plus insurance, right? So there's actually people that are put onto the ZV policy account that are 60-plus individuals. So in other words, they're over the age of 60. But actually, this is not properly founded in legislation. This was intended to be completed as legislation, but the need for the people to have access to insurance was recognized, and therefore in advance of that legislation, the policy was adjusted to include them, but without really the financial backing, let's say, to make sure that it was financially sustainable. So it's just one example. And the health sector, the financing perspective is full of these kinds of examples. But rather than take all of those on and try and fix them, we're putting the effort into an overhaul, comprehensive review change, which is the general health insurance. But there's a lot of examples of these that make our funds financially highly pressured, not financially sustainable. So it is exactly what we're trying to explain better, that people understand why we need the general health insurance.
Thank you very much, Minister.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Minister. Lyndon Brown from BCN TV, you have the floor.
Question to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, you are showing that colors matters. Blue is a royal color. But today we are focusing on the elderly. Okay. Prime Minister, the elderly are complaining. A lot of time they feel that they are being pushed aside. And I hope you have it in your discussion that you're going to have preferential treatment for the elderly in all areas, at the government building, at the post office, at GB. So they are just complaining. And also, the elderly that has so much education resources being laid off, do you have a plan to at least bring them back once a week, 5 times per month? Because they have a lot of resources to help St. Martin economy.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. In response to your question about the elderly complaining, to tell you the truth, I only received one complaint from the elderly because we have been catering to our elderly population as it relates to housing. They were the number one on the priority list, so those were the ones that were dealt with first. The matter that was addressed to me was indeed, I guess you're getting at those persons who are not laid off but retired. And what do you do with that brain drain? Indeed, it is a dilemma. We have noticed in key positions, persons have reached the pension age, and therefore they have to go home, and what do you do with them? I'm told that they're going to form a group and going to make some challenges to government as it relates to looking at elderly discrimination. And it's something that should be looked into, because indeed, there is a specific group of educated elderly persons that are just recently went on pension or are about to go into pension, and their expertise are still needed. So it's something that we have to look into, and we are feeling the brunt of it across the board. And I await for discussion with them. I'm told that they will come to my person to have a meeting, and I encourage that as well. As it relates to giving elderly preference, I do believe, and that shouldn't have changed, and if it has such, I take this opportunity to urge all businesses, the general public, to treat our elderly with respect, even within this building. And I believe they have served their time here, they have contributed, and therefore we should honor them and ensure that, number one, that we have lines for them, number two, that we make sure that they get service first. And because you brought it to my attention, I will double check downstairs to see how that is going, but it has always been that our elderly come first. If that has changed, I will look into it, but again, we must give our elderly the respect that is due unto them, because they have contributed to St. Martin, and they have contributed to where we are at today, so we must respect that. So I thank you for your question.
Thank you, PM. Honorable Ministers of the Council, members of the media, radio listeners, and online viewers, this brings us to the end of the Live Council of Ministers press briefing for today, Wednesday, March 20th, 2019. For rebroadcasts, tune in every evening at 7 p.m. on St. Martin Cable TV. For video on demand, log on to the government official website, which is stmartingov.org. On behalf of our team at the Department of Communication, we would like to wish our fellow co-worker, Relaika Roach, a happy birthday. I am Charity Dunker. Thank you for tuning in.